Hello, happy Sunday, y'all. It's almost October. Crazy. This year has flown by. So, we are going to be going live for the Dry Club today with Dr. Philippe Douillon, who's a board certified neurologist. And I'm super excited to have him on with us today to talk about the brain and booze relationship. So I'm just waiting for it to add him on here. I had him on my personal page, my own live stream, several times. So we have a fun little virtual acquaintanceship here. And I got so much good information on my page that I wanted to bring him on into the 1,000 Hours Dry community to share some of the really amazing facts. I actually shared a post probably a month ago just about how alcohol is actually affecting COVID. And if we cut alcohol out completely, we would have more room in hospitals. That quote, that just stuck in my head when you said, like, if people weren't drinking, there'd be more room for people there'd be more hospital beds in the ICU, which is like, people do not want to accept that alcohol is that impactful on our overall health. So thank you for taking the time on this Sunday. If you watch football, I know I'm cutting into your football watching time.
Thank you for having me.
Yes. So there's a few people here on the page who already recognized your name and they follow you on their own pages. So that was awesome. But I wanted to just jump right into this conversation. This community is either sober curious, sober, or doing the 1,000 Hours Dry Challenge. And the 1,000 Hours Dry Challenge is 42 days living alcohol free. So it's not necessarily that you're never going to drink again, but it is just it's a wellness challenge to encourage people to look at their relationship with alcohol. And in those 42 days, you can really learn a lot about like how alcohol and your life, what the relationship is between those two. So when it comes to the brain, you were dropping so many gems just on how the relationship with alcohol could turn into an addiction, how alcohol is like affecting our entire body. We talked a little bit about the difference between why alcohol is even more of a health concern than possibly smoking cigarettes, because cigarettes are affecting your lungs maybe, but alcohol is affecting your whole entire body. So we'll try to get all of that covered. But if you could explain to us how alcohol affects your brain, just like the basics. You take a drink and then what happens?
Yeah, so so you started out first by with that quote that I had said, like, if less people drank, we'd have more rooms available in the hospitals. And in fact, when we look at the stats from 2006 to 2014, hospital-related admissions for alcohol went from 3 million per year, 3 million people per year, to 5 million people per year. So it went up by like more than 50%, right?
Oh my God.
And so it's a significant problem in healthcare is alcohol abuse. And that number of 5 million people, this is, remember, 6 years ago. So chances are it's gone significantly higher since then. But that number of 5 million people aren't even people that in society we'd consider alcoholics, right? They're people who, they might just be sort of casual drinkers and they drank too much that night, or their drink was laced with something, or whatever the case is, or they fell and they hit their head, or something went wrong related to alcohol use. So it's a pretty significant problem. And so I'll start off with a little bit of a funny story when it comes to the way alcohol impacts the brain. And so a few years ago, I'm at a lounge in New York City, and there's this woman who's drinking. I don't know what she's drinking, but she's got a drink in her hand. She's probably standing a few feet away from me. The music is playing, and she's keeping a really good two-step. And then all of a sudden, she takes a couple of drinks, and that two-step gets real clumsy. And in neurology, we've got a term for that. We call it ataxia, right? So she could no longer maintain the coordination of her two-step. And so the neurology nerd in me was like, oh, there goes the Purkinje cells in her cerebellum, because those are the first cells within our central nervous system to really be impacted by alcohol. Mm-hmm. And that's why when you see people are out drinking, they lose their coordination. And that's actually the part of the brain that the police officers are testing when they
Right.
get you to, do that tandem gait where they have you try to
Yeah.
walk a straight line, one foot in
Walk a
front of the
straight
other.
line. I know it
Yeah,
all too well.
or do that stuff, right? So they're actually testing a part of your brain called your cerebellum, which is responsible for fine motor movement. And I think a lot of people don't recognize the fact that when you do go out and you're drinking, or you're staying home and you're drinking, and you start to feel good, or you start to feel a little buzz, or you get drunk, it's because of the negative impact that alcohol is having on the different cells in your brain,
Mm-hmm.
especially the neurons in your brain. And
Mm-hmm.
so alcohol is neurotoxic, meaning that it's a poison to the entire central nervous system. And one thing that we know for sure is that it is responsible for over 200 different medical disorders.
Wow.
Right? So it's a huge health concern.
So basically, as soon as you take what the first drink, the second drink, when are we starting to have the negative effects of alcohol?
Well, everybody's different,
Mm,
right? So some people will feel that a lot faster than others.
right.
It's based on a lot of different things. It's based on people's tolerance, so how much alcohol they've had in the past. It's based on their weight,
Mm,
because your body fat can really hold on to that alcohol. So it's based on the personal characteristics of that person.
okay.
Right?
And I think one of the things you did mention too before was one of the problems is when um, we have this information that's telling us one glass of wine is healthy for you. We can't, there's no way that we can make a statement like that because one glass of wine for me is a completely different intake on my body than a glass of wine for the next person. So when there's information out there saying, you know, a glass of wine is good for the heart or drinking in moderation, that's what it was, where you said,
Yeah.
we can't define moderation for the whole 300 million people in the United States. Like, there's no way to say 2 glasses of wine is moderation. Well, for one person, that's overboard. And for the next person, they might not feel any effects at all. And then we talk about the difference between like male and female, you said, body fat percentage, all of those things are going to affect how alcohol is affecting our body. So
Yep.
200 different medical issues. That is crazy.
Yeah. And so, like we said, alcohol is a significant issue. And I always say that alcohol, when it comes to marketing, it is like the most brilliant marketing strategy
Oh,
there
yeah.
is, right? I mean, it's literally like, listen, if you're gonna go out party, you wanna drink while you're partying. You want to sort of pre-game and drink before you're partying.
Oh,
If
the
you get
pre-gaming.
right, if you get drunk and hungover, you have something to drink
Bloody
to sort of
Mary.
wake you up. Um, if it's you go out for happy hour, you have drinks, right? If you go out for brunch on the weekend, you've got drinks.
Right.
If it's 11 o'clock in the morning and you feel like you want to drink, well, then you just say to yourself, well, it's 5 p.m. somewhere.
Oh,
And then they say, look, yeah, a glass of wine per day is good for your heart. Well, the reason why they say that has nothing to do with the alcohol itself. Alcohol, there is nothing good about alcohol.
yeah.
It's that within grapes, there is a chemical called resveratrol, which is a really powerful anti-inflammatory and antioxidant. And so, but you can get that by eating grapes, you can get that by eating berries, you can get that by eating vegetables,
Right.
right? And so just by having a well-balanced diet,
Yeah.
you can get all the antioxidants and anti-inflammatories that you need. And in fact, what we do know is that however you want to define moderate alcohol use, but alcohol use can lead to significant heart problems. In fact, it
Mm.
can lead to heart failure because it can weaken the muscles of the heart,
Mm-hmm.
and therefore the muscles can no longer contract. It can also predispose people to developing abnormal heart rhythms. And so as a neurologist, one of the things that, often deal with is people who have had strokes. Well, one of the causes of strokes is abnormal heart rhythms like atrial fibrillation. One of the risk
Mm.
factors for atrial fibrillation is alcohol use,
Mm.
right? So yeah, I mean, we've got to be better about what we're putting into our bodies. And we've
Right.
got to realize that, look, people are going to try to sell us on anything because
Yeah.
they want to make as much money off of us as possible. They don't care
Mm.
if they compromise our health and well-being.
Mm-hmm. Mm-hmm.
And alcohol is a great example of that.
Yeah. The commercials now, I saw an ad that was for a seltzer and it said, yes, it's another seltzer, but this one has antioxidants in it or something silly like that. And then
Yeah.
there's this is zero carbs, zero sugar, and people don't understand, like, there might not be any added sugar, but alcohol has to be metabolized as something. So it's either going to be metabolized as carbs or fat. It's usually metabolized as carbs, and that's going to turn into sugar. So there's no such thing as sugar-free alcohol, like, no matter what the ad says. One of the things that is big in this community, because people are either curious about going alcohol-free, or they're on October 1st, we're getting ready to start another 1,000 hours of alcohol-free living. So one of the things you talked about on my page with me was how the addiction to, or even if it's not an addiction, just how the habit of drinking gets formed. So can you tell us a little bit about, like, what that process looks like when maybe you're drinking, what we consider moderate drinking, and then 2 years later you realize, like, this is just a part of my routine. What happens from point A to point B?
Yeah, so the chemical dopamine plays a huge role in addiction, but more importantly, it plays a huge role in motivation and reward. And that's how habits form, that's how addiction forms, right? And so you do something that makes you feel good, it raises the dopamine level, right? And dopamine is like the pleasure sort of chemical. It's going to make you feel good. Really high amounts of dopamine can make you psychotic, but a decent increase will just make you feel really, really good.
Right.
And because it's a motivation and reward system, it is then going to send information to the rest of your brain for your brain to always then focus on what it is that caused you to feel that high that you felt. Right. And so you're always going to be chasing that dopamine bump. And if it's the alcohol that made you feel that way, then you're just going to want more and more alcohol. And so that's how the habit and the addiction really starts to form. That's how it starts to change the physiology of your brain. It's through the dopamine and the motivation and reward systems in the brain.
So your brain actually physiologically changes due to alcohol. Drinking regularly changes your brain.
Yeah, so not only does the physiology change, but the structure of your brain changes. And so one of the things that we'll see is when somebody drinks just a lot in the moment, right, is that your brain actually gets dehydrated. And so the structure of your brain starts to shrink, right? If it's a one-time or two-time thing, and then you stop drinking, fine, your brain will plump back up. But if somebody is a chronic abuser of alcohol, then what happens is that their brains can actually atrophy over a long period of time. And so one of the things that people are always worried about is, they don't want to get like dementia, right? They don't want to get Alzheimer's, right? Because that's incredibly scary. Well, alcohol causes dementia, and there's an alcohol-related dementia. And we see a lot of people who develop dementia from alcohol use. And not too long ago, I saw somebody who his son brought him to see me, and he was the life of the party, always drinking for years. And then all of a sudden, he is completely demented. Like, he can barely put two words together. He can't even answer his name, right? And when we look at his brain, it has significantly atrophied. Has shrunk because of the alcohol use. And it's shrunk in a very particular pattern where you see that the cerebellum, right, where I had said when I started this, I said, there was that girl that was dancing, and all of a sudden she lost coordination. It's because of her cerebellum. Well, his cerebellum has significantly shrunk, as well as the rest of his brain. And so it causes significant problems. Right?
People are usually thinking about their liver and their kidneys and everything else, just feeling dehydrated, but it's very rare that we are thinking about the beer and how that beer can affect your brain and shrinking. I mean, making your brain dehydrated, like literally shrinking the size of your brain. It's crazy. And again, like you said, the commercials and the ads that are trying to sell us alcohol, of course, they're not mentioning these other side effects, but it's crazy that something is legal and so easily accessible and also marketed to us in every single way possible. There was a meme going, or not even a meme, it was just a picture of an ad that Trader Joe's had over their wine, and it was something to the effect of like, schools back in, get your school supplies. And it's like a picture of like lined school paper with a wine bottle stain on the paper, selling to women who are having to have their kids at home with them, and they're trying to sell wine to women. So like little subtle things like that, where that's crazy. Like, actually, the more wine you drink, the more challenging it's going to be for you to teach your kids at home. So
Yeah.
it's not actually going to help you, which is crazy. So you talked about how there's a reward system. So we started getting this reward, or people who started, drinking and realized years later that it was now a habit. They're doing happy hour, 3 times a week, or they have to do Sunday brunch every Sunday, and not just brunch, but it's bottomless mimosas. During, the football games on the weekends, you're drinking all day long, the pre-gaming and the post-gaming.
Sure.
And their reward is like the feeling, but then there's all these negative effects. So you talked a little bit, you explained cravings and the whole entire pattern that happens when like we see something or hear something. So for those of us who are trying to stay to the 1,000 hours dry, and we've already built this habit, how do we face the cravings? How do we work with our brain to avoid drinking? Or when we see drinks around us, what can we do to be able to stay alcohol free?
Yeah, and so look, once your brain, once the dopamine level goes up, and it's related to something like alcohol, and I said, look, your brain's always going to be on the lookout for the thing that brought up that dopamine level, right? So it's going to chase that, and that's part of the craving. Well, there's another step when it comes to whether it's addiction or habits, and that is having cues, that's having triggers, right? And so having a trigger, like there are certain friends that you drink with, right? That's going to make it more likely that you drink when you see them. Having triggers like, listen, if you're a bartender and you've had an alcohol issue, that's a significant problem, right? And we see that things like that happen all the time. And so you have to be very mindful of what your triggers are. And the reality is, so you've mentioned, like, there's like really hard liquor, you've mentioned wine, you also mentioned beer. There's this thing called beer potamania, where when you drink beer, it actually lowers the sodium level in your blood. And if the sodium level in your blood drops too low, that can cause a lot of different neurological issues. It can cause seizures, it can cause fatigue. But even more dangerous than that is that when then you go to correct the sodium level, and even if it's being corrected in the hospital, you have to be very, very careful. Because when you correct the sodium level too quickly, that means a lot of fluid now is moving into the cells in the body, especially the brain cells. And you can cause the brain cells to rupture in your brainstem. And that is not a very good way to die. That is probably the worst possible way somebody can die. Right? And so we've got to be really, really careful with what we're putting into our body, and then how we're trying to recover.
The recovery part. So basically overhydrating from abusing something that's like beer could have a negative effect on us.
Well, it's not just the overhydrating, it's if you're overhydrating with like salt, right, to compensate. So you've got to be really careful.
Like Gatorade, basically. Doesn't Gatorade have a lot of sodium? No, it has a lot of...
Gatorade could have a lot of sodium in it, yeah.
Okay, yeah. So when
so so you've got to be careful with all this stuff. And look, I've seen healthcare providers, like even, doctors and nurses who will go out and drink, and then they'll just stick an IV in to rehydrate themselves. And I'm like, you're crazy. You're about to kill yourself. You don't even know what your sodium level is right now, right? So it's a really pervasive problem.
Yeah. So the Pedialyte and the Gatorade, or people mixing like vodka and Gatorade together because they think they're going to stay hydrated. These are probably not the best idea.
Yeah. Look, you want to hydrate yourself. You certainly want to hydrate yourself slowly. I mean, first of all, you don't want to be drinking, that much, right? Where to the point you're causing problems. But yeah, all things you've got to be really mindful of. It's a really complicated issue, and we see all the bad stuff that goes wrong
Mm.
either in the hospital or in the offices, right? And so I talk a lot about the brain, but also as a neurologist, I deal with a lot of nerve issues, right?
Mm.
So the nerves that supply your hands and your feet. And people develop alcohol-related neuropathy, right? Where they get burning and tingling sensations in their feet, and their legs and their arms and hands. They get numbness. It can be so bad that they can develop weakness, right? And not too long ago, somebody came to me and they're like, "Oh my gosh, you're the last resort. My neuropathy is so bad. What can you give me for it?" And I said, "Well, when was your last drink?" And she said, "2 days ago." And it's like, well, if the alcohol is causing your neuropathy, like, what am I going to be able to give you to make you to feel better? You actually have to
Right.
stop doing the thing that's causing the damage to begin with.
Right. You can't just take a pill. How long do these brain changes last? Can you reverse changes on the brain, and how long does it take? So how long do the changes, I guess if you could explain, like, if from a short-term effect where you mentioned, like, if you have 3 or 4 drinks in a day, that's already making a change in the physiology of your brain. And then if you can talk about the person who's been drinking for like years and that damage, can we reverse those? How long do they last?
Yeah, so look, the good thing about the brain is that it's capable of a tremendous amount of healing, right? But that requires that, one, you're taking away the thing that is doing the damage, as well as not, giving the brain anything else that could potentially be damaging it. And then now you're doing things that are going to promote the healing of the brain, that are going to promote the creation of new neurons and new connections, right? So it's not just stopping the alcohol, which you need to do, um, and you'll need to do that, for an extended period of time, if not forever, depending on how long you've been drinking. But then
Mm-hmm.
it's also doing things like exercising, eating healthy,
Right.
minimizing stress, getting enough sleep, constantly learning, constantly challenging your brain.
Mm-hmm.
And so, yeah, somebody goes out tonight and look, they have a few drinks. We might be able to see some changes on a CAT scan or an MRI, especially in the cerebellum and in the back part of the brain. But look, there can be physiological changes that are happening that we can't see, right?
Mm.
Even if a brain looks completely normal. In
Right.
fact, if somebody is feeling tipsy or drunk, that suggests that there are changes happening,
Mm.
right? We All we can really see is the gross structure of the brain, but within the brain itself, it's like its own little universe.
Right.
And so the alcohol is having a negative impact at that level.
Mm. And then how long would it take to recover from, like, years to recover the brain from a long-term alcohol abuse?
It depends on the extent of the damage. Some people may not be able to recover, right?
Mm.
So the person I saw not too long ago with the really horrible dementia, I mean, he's a little bit older. Chances are he is
He's
not going to recover from
come
that,
back.
right? Just
Yeah.
because even though that the brain is capable of a tremendous amount of recovery, but the brain needs time to recover. And
Mm-hmm.
he may just not have enough time left. And he may not also
Right.
be capable of doing the things that are needed because he is so far gone in terms of his dementia,
Right.
right? So it really depends. I mean, alcohol is one of those things that is such a poison to every aspect of the body that it's really, you're better off not starting.
Not starting. Yeah,
You know,
that is the key. But in commercials are bombarding us. It's the good thing that I feel like hopeful because of pages like this and communities like this, and um definitely there's a surge in sober curiosity in this new generation, and it's not something that is like secretive. So as awesome as a 12-step program like Alcoholics Anonymous is, and it's saved probably millions of lives around the world, as the generations change and this generation is more open and talking and posting and sharing and social, having something like this page where we're encouraging people, hey, just, it's not about you're an alcoholic, it's about just look at your relationship with alcohol. It's making it easier to access and easier to digest because people don't feel like the shame and guilt, and they take 42 days and they're like, oh, okay, I didn't drink for 42 days, I feel pretty good. Or I noticed that, like, wow, I was drinking a lot, and you know what? It's not really doing anything for me. So, from
yeah.
the doctor's mouth, how much alcohol is healthy?
None. I mean, I don't, right? And there are
You hear
people, there are
that?
going to be
No
some, look,
amount of alcohol. We're
there are
not
going to be
making
some
this up,
people that,
people.
there'll be some people that debate this, right?
Yeah.
And I've had conversations with doctors from all specialties, including cardiologists, where they're like, no, alcohol, there's no amount of alcohol that's healthy, right? And obviously we see it when things go bad.
Right.
But I think the last time we had this conversation, I said to you, look, if I said I was going to prescribe you something that when people take it, there's a 40% chance that they're going to engage in some kind of like violent behavior, right? It's
Right.
associated with 40% of rapes, 40% of physical assaults, right? 40% of murders, meaning that either the perpetrator or the victim was somehow
Right.
intoxicated. If I
Right.
said that, look, there's certain percentages of drownings that occur because of this medication I'm going to give you, certain percentages of house fires that are going to happen uh, because of this drug that I'm going to give you, you'd be like, no, I don't want this.
Right.
So I don't
You want
understand
to take
why.
this pill that has a 40% chance that you could die, hurt someone, hurt yourself, start a fire, be sexually assaulted, be dehydrated. It's only a 40% chance, but here, I'm going to prescribe, like, yeah, no one's going to take that. But the commercials make it so sexy, and, you know, it's just so, it's crazy.
Right. And look, and the fact that you say, look, the commercials make it real sexy, the reality is alcohol actually decreases sexual performance,
And people think they're
right?
doing the most.
And people might think very differently, but you
Right.
know, it decreases sexual performance, especially in men.
Right.
And so while they may sell it as something sexy, it actually has the opposite effect.
Yeah, physiologically. Man, yeah, I mean, conversations like this are so important and more welcome, you know, and that's one of the reasons I wanted to have you in on this community page, because people that are on this page are looking for resources and they're open to hearing, like, okay, good. The doctor said it's not good. They said it's not, I get it. It's not just, this is like the truth. We're telling you the
Yeah.
truth that there is no drinking in moderation. We can't really define moderation for the whole entire world. Every time you drink, you are taking a risk, whether it's a glass of wine or if it's only once a week. There's no benefit to it. And the whole sales pitch of wine is healthy for your heart is complete BS, because you could just eat grapes, you could eat blueberries, raspberries. You're going to get more antioxidants from eating the actual food that doesn't have this chemical added to it. And when we are doing our 1,000 hours dry challenge or just trying to live the alcohol-free life, the most important thing we need to do is to be mindful of the triggers. So there was an order. This is my last question. So you broke it down to where you gave the Cinnabon example. Like, there's a reason that
Yeah.
it's in a certain place. So the same thing with alcohol. Like, it's placed in certain places. It's placed at certain height levels. What's happening with us when we see the label or we see the commercial? There was like a series that you kind of explained that actually happens in our brain to where then we think the reward is actually going to come.
Yeah, so I think the example that I had given, I was talking about how Cinnabon, they strategically place their stores in malls, right? So they typically tend to be away from all the other food places.
Right.
And so you get the trigger of their smell, right?
Yes.
And it's not sort of tainted by all the other smells around you. So you get
Right.
their smell that, causes a craving. Um, and so then your brain is like, oh, you start remembering experiences that you've had with that,
Right.
how good it might have tasted, how good it might have made you feel in the moment. And so then your brain becomes fixated on that. It develops a craving in that moment. And you start making your way towards where that store is, the Cinnabon is, right?
Right.
And look, I mean, alcohol, I'm sure, is strategically placed in certain places, right? I
Right.
mean, a lot of restaurants will tell you that's how they make the bulk of their money
Yeah,
is through
they bring you the
alcohol.
drink menu before the food menu. They
Yeah,
ask you, do you want something to drink before you sit down? You've sat for 2 minutes and it's like, welcome to wherever you are. Can I get you guys something to drink? Like, well, no, we came here to eat. So why did you offer us food first? You're offering us drinks before we even see the food menu. So when you said you see or smell or hear the thing, that's like the trigger, and then that leads to the craving for the person who is trying to avoid alcohol. It's the commercials, it's the ads, it
And I
is.
think it's the social pressure also, right? I mean, if you
Oh
go
my
out with your
gosh, yeah,
friends,
yeah.
like, so I don't drink. And I've never really drank just because I was always like an athlete. So I was always very mindful of what I
Well,
put into
you're
my
in
body.
medical school, you can't drink your.
Well, you'd be surprised how many people drink to get through medical school. So, but yeah, but even as somebody who doesn't drink, like when you're with a group of people and you sit down and everybody's like, oh, they're ordering their drinks and you're going to be the one ordering the water or the juice or whatever it is, right? You feel that pressure.
Right.
So I think that there's also the social pressure there,
Mm-hmm.
and so you're like, oh, all right, I'll just have one,
Right.
and then you've got one and it starts to affect you. And then very quickly, one turns into five, right?
Right. Yeah.
And so there are all kinds of triggers and pressures that people need to be aware of when it comes to alcohol.
Yeah, because and if you're not mindful of the trigger then leads to the craving leads to the action, and the action leads to the reward, but the reward is not always positive really when it
Yeah.
starts to like downward spiral.
Right.
Last thing about dopamine, you mentioned how dopamine can go up really, really high. I've learned that one of the reasons we end up having like, it's very common to have sugar cravings right when you've quit in the early sobriety, because your body is looking for something to replace the sugar that
Yeah.
you were getting in, which the sugar intake also increase your dopamine level. So things that can increase our dopamine level when we are moving away from alcohol and moving towards an alcohol-free life. You said exercise, reading, constantly learning, doing things
Well,
that give you the reward, that same reward feeling. So like completing things, basically. Starting
yeah,
things and
I
completing
think
them.
one of the things that you'll often see is that people replace one addiction with another, right? And
Right.
so they may replace a bad addiction with
Right.
a good addiction, although,
Yes.
addictions, even if we consider them good, can cause a lot of problems, right? So if
Right.
somebody over exercises, that can cause a lot of problems as well. But yeah, it's because that they're sort of chasing that same feeling. And so we do know that obviously exercise causes a release of endorphins. It can cause dopamine to go up. That can cause people to get that really good feeling that then, that's the reward, and they're going to seek that behavior out to continue
Mm-hmm.
to get that reward, because
Mm-hmm.
dopamine is very much about motivation,
Mm.
right? And it motivates your behavior. So from the perspective of the brain, none of this is good or bad, right?
Right.
It's just the impact that it has on the physiology and the structure of the brain.
Mm-hmm. So someone asked, how long does it take to heal? Can you tell us a little bit about the course that you offer that can help to just heal your brain, make your brain stronger, make your brain better? Like you talk about how you can actually like become more intelligent. You can fix your brain and make it more powerful than it is today. Tell us a little bit about your course and how
Yeah,
people can
so
access that.
I created a course called Take Charge of Your Brain in 30 Days. And so the course is really about teaching people how to have a completely different relationship with their brains,
Mm,
about teaching people how to become the leaders that their brains so desperately need them to be, right?
right.
Because when we talk about things like dopamine and how it motivates your behavior, your brains can be kind of out of control and it needs you to sort of guide it. And so
Mm,
this course helps to do that. It teaches people about the importance of having a mission, vision, and purpose, regardless of whatever your diagnosis is going to be. Teaches
mm-hmm.
people about the impact of different things on their overall health, whether it's what you eat, exercise, what you're putting into your body, but also the impact of different things on the brain, as well as neurological disorders. And then it teaches people about how to create their own prescription plan, so that way they can not only get healthier, but create the extraordinary life that they've always wanted to live. And that prescription plan is really rooted in the development of their mind, their body, and their spirit.
Mm. So we all need a mission, a vision, and a purpose. I
Yeah.
like that. If you don't have those three, we're kind of just.
And that stuff has a significant impact on how your brain evolves. And what we do know is that people who have a purpose even if it's when they're 80, 90 years old, they do
Right?
better than people who don't. They tend to
Mm-hmm.
have less cognitive impairment than people who don't have a mission, vision, and purpose, right? We
Right.
all need a reason to get up in the morning,
Yes.
right? And so
Yeah.
having a mission, vision, and purpose helps you to do that. And it changes the way that the brain evolves.
That's amazing. And I think sometimes people think people think that there has to be like your purpose has to be some like grand scale things like I'm going to invent this. Like your purpose can be being a great grandparent, being a great partner, or being something in your community. It doesn't necessarily have to be this grand scale theme. Amazing course. I highly recommend it, everyone. Yes, take charge of your brain. Thank you, Lonnie. Um, so I think that's it. Is there anything else you want to leave us with? Just the community here again is sober curious or sober or participating in the 1,000 Hours Dry Challenge. Any tips and tools for us to be successful in our 1,000 Hours Dry?
Yeah, I think, look, the great thing about the brain is that it's always changing, right? It changes every moment depending on what we're thinking, what we're doing. And so even if somebody has an injury to their brain or they used to drink a lot of alcohol, your brain can heal. Your brain can recover, right? You can still do really extraordinary things. But it all depends on the what you're thinking about. So the thoughts that you're having, the actions that you decide that you're going to take. So the evolution of your health and your brain all lies within your own power.
Wow. Thoughts you're thinking and basically how you're approaching the whole program. So thank you so much again. I always love conversations with you. You have, how our brains work. So it's just an amazing thing. Like all doctors are awesome, but I feel like we can't do anything without our brains. So this is number one. So you guys, he said it, there's no amount of alcohol that's healthy. So all of these things where a glass of wine, drinking in moderation, those are not true. They're just trying to sell you stuff. But you can heal your brain. There is no one window that it's going to take a year or 2 years. Everyone's different, but just know that your brain can heal. So we are doing a great service to ourselves by doing the 1,000 Hours Dry Challenge and doing them over and over and over and choosing alcohol-free lifestyle. So thank you so much again. If you guys look in, I think it's this corner up here, one of these corners, you can find Dr. Philippe's page. Follow him on his page. He's got great information, just overall wellness and brain health. And then also you can access his program on the link in his bio. So go check out his page. Thank you again for joining me. Everybody who's watching, you can go back to watching football now on this lovely Sunday. So thanks again so much for joining us. And I will see you next time.
Awesome. Thank you.
Bye.
Bye.
Okay, you guys. So I'll save this on the 1,000 Hours Dry page so you can access this. Send it to your friends. Send it to your family who thinks that drinking wine is actually doing something good for them. We all know that alcohol is doing nothing positive for us. That's just the reality. You heard it from the doctor himself. So you can heal your brain, and you're doing yourself a huge service by joining the 1,000 Hours Dry Challenge. We start on October 1st. So thank you guys so much. Have an amazing Sunday. I'm going to post this right now.